Ever buy something totally extravagant and immediately regret it? Or spent way too long agonizing over whether to buy a stock?
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Money decisions can be tough.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we're doing a deep dive today into The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
It's a great book.
It's not your typical finance book, though, right? It's not about some secret formula or hot stock tips.
Right. It's not really about spreadsheets or algorithms or anything like that.
It's more about the psychology of money.
Exactly. The human side of it all. You know,
Yeah.
our behaviors and our emotions and how those things shape our financial decisions.
I gotta ask, have you ever wondered why some people just seem to be good with money?
Yeah.
It just comes naturally to them. While others, they struggle, even if they, have the same financial knowledge.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions this book tackles. And it also looks at why we make decisions that seem totally crazy in hindsight.
Right. Why did I buy that?
Yeah.
I love that this book isn't like a typical finance book. It's more like
the psychology book for your wallet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's all about our relationship with money.
And it dives deep into this idea that our experiences with money really shape our decisions.
Absolutely. What seems totally rational to one person might seem completely insane to someone else.
Right. Like that story about John F. Kennedy and how his wealthy upbringing during the Depression really shaped his views on economics.
That's a great example. And
Yeah.
it makes you think about how your own background and experiences influence you, right?
Totally. Maybe your parents were really frugal or maybe they were big spenders and how that affects you today.
Yeah. And the book also highlights this idea of luck and risk and how those play a huge role in our lives.
Like that story about Bill Gates and his high school friend Ken Evans.
Yes. Both were brilliant with computers, but obviously their lives took very different paths.
And it really makes you think, how much of success is just being in the right place at the right time?
Right. And how much is just pure luck?
Which can be kind of scary to think about. But the book doesn't just say, oh, well, it's all luck and that's it. Right. It pushes you to think, okay, if we can't control everything, what can we control?
And how do we make smart choices even with all this uncertainty?
And that's where the book's insights on decision-making come in. It challenges this idea that we're always rational with our money.
Oh yeah, we're definitely not always rational. Think about lottery tickets.
Exactly. Logically, the odds are terrible, but people still buy them hoping for that big win.
Especially people who might be struggling financially, which is kind of interesting.
Right. It shows that it's not always about cold, hard logic.
It's about hope and dreaming of a better life.
Right. And the book highlights how emotions often overpower our rational thinking when it comes to money.
Which probably explains some of my past financial decisions.
I think we've all been there.
The ones that seemed totally reasonable at the time, but now I'm like, oh gosh, what was I thinking?
But the book doesn't judge. It helps you understand those choices and hopefully avoid making the same mistakes again.
Right. It's about understanding your own biases and triggers when it comes to money. So we've talked about how our background and emotions play a big role, but then there's the whole thing about time, especially when it comes to investing.
Yeah, this is a big one.
The book talks a lot about how long-term success isn't about getting rich quick, but about patience and the power of compounding.
Like the example of Warren Buffett, who became a billionaire over decades, not overnight.
Right. He didn't win the lottery or strike it rich with some risky bet.
It was consistent investing over a long period of time.
It's a good reminder that slow and steady can actually win the race.
Absolutely. And the book actually compares Buffett's returns to Jim Simons, who's a hedge fund manager with much higher average returns.
Oh, wow.
But Simons had a shorter investing career. So in the end, Buffett's wealth was way bigger just from the power of compounding over time.
That's amazing. It really makes you think about the long game.
It does. And it kind of goes against all the get-rich-quick schemes you see out there.
Totally. And speaking of the long game, the book also emphasizes this idea of planning for things to not go exactly as planned.
Yeah, that's huge. It's about building in a margin of safety like those blackjack card counters in Vegas.
Oh yeah, they have systems to tilt the odds in their favor.
Right, but they never bet everything because they know they could still lose.
So it's not about being overly cautious, but about acknowledging that things can happen.
Exactly. Uncertainty is always a factor no matter how much you plan.
And that reminds me of this concept of margin of safety that Benjamin Graham talked about.
Yeah, it's all about building a buffer to protect yourself when things inevitably go wrong.
Like Bill Gates famously kept enough cash on hand to cover a year of payroll at Microsoft.
Just in case of a crisis. That's smart.
Yeah, even the most successful people understand that things don't always go as planned.
For sure. And this kind of leads us to another interesting point the book makes about wealth.
It challenges the traditional idea of what it means to be wealthy.
Right. It argues that the greatest value of money isn't about accumulating stuff, but about something else.
What's that?
Control over your time and a sense of freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not about how much money you have, but how your money allows you to live your life.
I remember interning at an investment bank and being blown away by the salaries.
Oh, yeah.
But then I saw how hard those bankers worked and the sacrifices they made. I thought,
Is it really worth it?
exactly. They were making tons of money, but they had no time to enjoy it.
That's the trade-off a lot of people miss.
So the book makes this distinction between being rich, which is often about showing off your wealth.
And being wealthy, which is more about financial security and freedom.
Right, like you can have a high income and still be living paycheck to paycheck.
Absolutely. The book actually uses the example of Rihanna.
Oh, wow.
She almost went bankrupt even though she was making a ton of money.
Really?
Yeah, it's because she was prioritizing spending over building lasting wealth.
That's a good reminder that it's not just about how much you earn, but how you manage it,
It all comes back to savings.
which can be a scary word for some people.
But the book reframes it in an interesting way. It says that savings is the difference between what your ego wants to spend.
And what your income actually allows you to save.
Exactly. It's about creating that gap between your desires and your means.
So it's not about denying yourself everything, but about making conscious choices
About what truly matters to you.
and aligning your spending with those values.
That's the key. And this kind of leads us to another big topic, the emotional roller coaster of investing.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
We all know we should be rational and logical, but what happens when fear takes over?
Or greed.
Right. We'll dive into that after a quick break to gather our thoughts. So we were talking about the emotional side of investing.
Oh yeah. It can be a wild ride.
It really can. We can logically get long-term investing, but then...
But then the market dips.
Right. And suddenly we panic.
It's like all logic goes out the window.
The book really dives into how our emotions, like fear and greed, can sabotage our financial goals,
Even when we know better.
even when we have a plan.
It's tough.
Housel uses this great analogy to explain this.
Okay.
Imagine you want a new car. You could buy it outright, find a cheaper used car, or you could try to steal one.
Okay, stealing's obviously a bad idea.
Right. But so many people try to do the equivalent with investing,
What do you mean?
trying to get market returns without accepting any volatility.
Like wanting all the rewards but none of the risks.
Exactly. It's like wanting to steal that car.
You might get away with it for a bit, but eventually it'll catch up to you.
Volatility is just part of the market. It's a price you pay for the potential for growth.
So trying to avoid it completely is a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much. And the book gives examples of companies that tried to smooth out their earnings to make things look more stable.
Like GE and Freddie Mac.
Right. And we all know how that turned out.
Not great.
It highlights this idea that trying to hide the bumps in the road can actually lead to bigger problems down the line.
So transparency is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And accepting that ups and downs are just part of the journey.
Okay, so we got to accept volatility. But how do we deal with those feelings of panic when the market takes a dip?
That's the tough part. The book suggests thinking of volatility as a fee.
A fee.
Like when you buy a ticket to Disneyland,
I see.
you pay a price for the experience.
Right.
Market volatility is like the fee you pay for the opportunity to participate in long-term growth.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
It changes your perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of freaking out about every dip.
You see it as the cost of doing business.
Exactly. The price of admission for the potential rewards.
I like that. And it ties back to this idea of being reasonable that the book talks about,
Right. It's not about being perfectly rational.
which is probably impossible.
Pretty much. But it's about making reasonable financial decisions even when we're feeling emotional.
Acknowledging our emotions, but not letting them completely control us.
The book actually talks about this Dr. Julius Wagner-Jareg, who won a Nobel Prize for a pretty controversial treatment.
Oh, wow.
He treated syphilis with induced fevers.
That sounds risky.
It was, but it turned out to be effective.
So sometimes even decisions that seem irrational can have positive outcomes,
It's about finding that balance between logic and intuition,
and understanding that there's not always one right answer.
especially when it comes to money. And speaking of things that aren't always clear-cut, the book talks about this allure of pessimism.
Oh, yeah. Seems like bad news always gets more attention than good news.
That's true. And there are a few reasons for that.
All right.
First off, money affects everyone. So any threat to our financial well-being makes us pay attention.
It's like a survival instinct.
Exactly. We're wired to pay attention to potential dangers.
It's hard to ignore those headlines about a recession or a stock market crash.
Right, because it could affect your job, your savings, your whole life.
And second, negative events tend to have immediate, intangible consequences.
Like a natural disaster or a terrorist attack, you see the damage right away.
But positive progress, especially economic progress, is often gradual.
It's like watching a plant grow. You don't notice the daily changes, but over time,
You see the results?
we tend to overlook those gradual improvements because they become the norm.
Like we get used to things getting better.
Exactly. And the book argues that this focus on the negative can distort our view of the future,
We get so caught up in what might go wrong.
that we miss the opportunities for growth and progress.
It's like that saying about focusing on the donut instead of the hole.
That's a good one. And Housel gives the example of oil reserves.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the early 2000s, everyone thought we were running out of oil.
It was a big concern.
But what they didn't account for was human ingenuity.
Our ability to adapt and find solutions.
Exactly. The rising price of oil led to innovation like fracking and horizontal drilling.
Which unlocked new reserves.
The pessimists were looking at the problem with a limited view.
They didn't consider our capacity to innovate,
And that's a key takeaway. It's not about being blindly optimistic,
but about understanding that progress often happens in unexpected ways.
and that setbacks are just part of the journey.
This reminds me of another point about narratives and how they shape our perceptions.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. The book uses this analogy of an alien visiting Earth. The alien visits in 2007 and then again in 2009.
Got it.
They noticed that the physical world hasn't really changed.
The cities, the buildings, the infrastructure.
It's all still there, but the economic mood has shifted dramatically.
From confidence to fear.
Exactly. The only thing that really changed was the story we were telling ourselves about the economy.
In 2007, it was all about growth and prosperity.
Housing prices were soaring, the stock market was booming,
But by 2009, the bubble had burst.
the financial system was in crisis.
And the narrative became one of fear and uncertainty,
It's amazing how our beliefs can influence reality.
like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
If enough people believe something, it can become true regardless of the facts.
That's scary.
It is, and it highlights how powerful narratives can be, especially in today's world, with social media and the 24-hour news cycle.
So how do we navigate this world of competing narratives,
Yeah.
especially when making financial decisions?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
We need to question assumptions.
And seek out diverse perspectives.
We need to be aware of our own biases.
And recognize that the stories we're exposed to can shape our thinking.
It's like we need to become more discerning consumers of information.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to something as important as our finances.
And this ties back to that idea of overestimating skill and underestimating luck.
Like the story of Bill Gates and Kent Evans.
Right. Both were talented, but only one became a household name.
The book argues that we often look at successful people and try to reverse engineer their success.
We assume that if we follow the same steps, we'll get the same results.
But we forget about the role of chance.
Being in the right place at the right time.
Avoiding those unforeseen events that can derail even the best plans.
It's like that saying, success is where preparation meets opportunity.
You can be talented and hardworking, but without the right opportunities.
Or a little bit of luck.
Your path can be very different.
And it's not just about external luck.
It's also about internal luck.
Like our inherent talents and the values we're raised with.
All those things can affect our financial trajectories.
It makes you realize that judging success solely on outcomes can be misleading.
Two people can make similar decisions, but end up with vastly different results. It's not to discourage hard work or ambition,
But to have some humility.
and recognize that the path to financial success is rarely straightforward.
It's about celebrating those who achieve great things, but also understanding that luck plays a role,
And that our own journeys may unfold differently.
even if we follow similar principles.
And this goes back to that idea of embracing room for error,
Having a plan B.
because life rarely goes according to plan.
This makes me think about another point the book makes about defining the game you're playing,
Yes, making sure your actions align with your goals.
not getting caught up in someone else's game.
Like the dot-com bubble where so many investors got swept up in the frenzy.
Chasing momentum instead of focusing on long-term fundamentals.
It's like a game of musical chairs.
As long as the music's playing, everything's fine.
But when it stops.
Someone's left without a seat.
And in the case of the dot-com bubble, a lot of people lost a lot of money.
So the point is not that all speculation is bad.
It's about recognizing that different investors have different goals and risk tolerances.
So you need to understand your own investment philosophy
Your own definition of success.
and make sure your actions are aligned with that,
Don't get swayed by what other people are doing.
because they might be playing a completely different game.
Exactly. And this leads to another interesting idea the book explores about wealth and happiness.
Okay, let's talk about that.
So we were talking about wealth and happiness.
It's funny how we often think more money equals more happiness.
Right. But the book challenges that idea. It's not that simple.
Yeah, there's definitely more to it.
It digs into this idea of wealth versus just having a high income,
Okay,
and how true wealth can buy you something way more valuable than just stuff.
what's that?
Control over your time.
Yeah. Time is precious.
It really is. And I think a lot of us have seen those people who look rich on the outside,
Fancy cars, big houses, all that.
but they're always stressed working all the time.
Yeah, they're trapped by their lifestyle.
Exactly. They might have a high income, but no time to actually enjoy it.
The book mentions a study about happiness in America.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
It found that even though wealth has increased a lot since the 1950s, our happiness levels haven't really changed.
That's interesting.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that just having more stuff doesn't automatically make you happier.
What really matters is having autonomy.
Being able to make choices that align with your values.
Spending your time, how you want to spend it.
And that's where true wealth comes in. It gives you the security and flexibility to live life on your own terms.
Like pursue your passions.
Spend time with loved ones.
Or just say no to things you don't want to do.
The author actually talks about his own experience.
Oh yeah.
He realized that the high-pressure world of investment banking wasn't for him.
It didn't align with his values.
Exactly. He wanted more freedom and control over his time.
So he chose a different path.
One that let him pursue his passion for writing.
Even if it meant earning less money.
It's inspiring, right?
It is. It reminds us that there are different ways to define success.
And that financial success doesn't have to come at the expense of your happiness.
It's about figuring out what matters most to you,
Defining your own game.
not letting society dictate your goals.
Whether it's financial freedom, creative expression, family time, or making a difference in the world.
Once you know your values, you can make choices to support those goals.
Even if they seem unconventional.
Maybe it's taking a lower paying job with more flexibility,
Or starting a business.
investing in experiences instead of things.
Or even retiring early to live a simpler life.
The key is that there's no right or wrong answer.
It's about finding what works for you.
Creating a life that feels both prosperous and meaningful.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been really thought-provoking.
It has. I'm definitely thinking about money differently now.
I am too. It's made me realize how much my own psychology affects my financial decisions.
If anyone out there wants to explore these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
It's a fantastic book. It's not just about managing money.
It's about understanding how money manages us.
And as you continue to learn and grow in this area, think about this.
Good.
The book focuses on individual psychology, but what about the collective psychology of a nation? Or even the whole world?
Wow, that's a big question.
It is. How do those shared narratives and beliefs shape financial markets and economic policies?
That's something to ponder for sure.
It is. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us. And remember,
Keep diving into those big questions.
see you next time.